David Davis.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I will try and discipline my taking of interventions in that case. It's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Carmarthen and Effort. I shan't follow him down his route of devolution for Wales, despite my name being Davis. The House will be unsurprised that I find a great deal to approve of in this Queen's speech. It is, after all, the first Queen's speech delivered by a solely Conservative government for nearly 20 years. And in particular, I welcome in particular the European Union's referendum bill. Contrary to what's been said, this is asking the people's permission to do something, stay in or leave. It's not anything else beyond that, and it's long overdue. I welcome the schools and adoption bill. Two sets of moves in the right direction. I would do more myself, but they are at least beneficial. I welcome the enterprise bill, which will build on the economic success of the last few years, and because it will create jobs, will probably do more to reduce poverty in this country than any other social measure. I welcome the childcare bill, which doubles the free childcare to 30 hours a week. Indeed, again, I would go further and reduce some of the restrictions on that childcare provision, because again, I think it will help underpin the lives of ordinary people in a very beneficial way. And I also welcome the right to buy bill, very controversial, but done properly, and at this point matters, done properly, it will both improve the ability of ordinary working people to get onto the property ladder, something which has been decried, or the failure to do that has been decried on both sides of this House. But at the same time, it will release money to allow new social housing, which every government for the last 20 years has failed to provide on a sufficient scale. Every government. And indeed, the last Labour government failed in its 13 years to provide as much social housing as 1 year under Margaret Thatcher. So we all have to face up to that fact. However, I want to talk about three areas of concern, many of which have been mentioned before, particularly by my right honourable friend, the erstwhile Attorney General. But the first one is the Scotland bill. I'm sorry the member for Gordon's not here, because he would have some views on this, but despite the fact I am a very firm unionist, I have long been an advocate, since 1998 in fact, of more fiscal autonomy for the Scottish Parliament. Indeed, when I was the Public Accounts Committee Chairman in 1998-99, I went to see Gordon Brown to tell him that the mechanism he had chosen of having Holyrood dependent on an opaque, virtually incomprehensible subvention formula was actually a grievance machine. It would create grievances in Scotland and it would create grievances in England. And as such, it was a destabilising rather than a stabilising measure. And it seems to me that we need to grip this. We need to make it such that the Scottish Parliament can pay its own way from funding that it raises and controls, both in policy and executive terms. And we need to make sure that those subventions provided from the rest of the United Kingdom, in the form of pensions and other welfare costs and so on, are properly costed, as is all the other taxes raised in Scotland that don't go to the Scottish Parliament, so that we do our judgments in the future on the basis of knowledge, not on the basis of assertion and counter-assertion from the two sides of Hadrian's Wall, as it were. Now, that's one thing, and we'll come back to that in great detail, no doubt, during the debate on the various measures relating both to Scotland and England. The area of this Queen's speech that worries me most, however, like my right honourable friend from Beaconsfield, is the whole question of the Human Rights Act repeal. And, by the way, with it, the Counter-Terrorism Bill and the Communications Data Bill, so-called Snoopers Charter. I am very pleased that the government has decided to step back from an immediate rush into the repeal of the Human Rights Act. It seems to me very sensible, and frankly, with only 19 days to go to the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta, I think at least shows some sensitivity to the history of our country and what we stand for, something my honourable friend referred to. We should remember the biggest lesson of Magna Carta is that liberty, the acquisition of liberty and the loss of liberty in our history has often happened by accident as much as by plan. And we must think about the unintended consequences of what we do when we are setting about changing these major constitutional issues. Before this debate, I spent a little time looking through the list of adverse judgments against the United Kingdom by the European Court of Human Rights, really since we joined, but certainly since 2001, when the ECHR came into effect. Now, bear in mind, I'm the person, along with Jack Straw, that brought to this House the motion which stopped the imposition of prisoner votes on this country, in effect. So I have a very sceptical view of the ECHR, and yet I found that some 90% of the judgments I agreed with, including such diverse things as taking away from the government the right to keep the DNA of innocent people for years, through to preserving the right for British citizens to wear a crucifix whilst at work. That's the sort of diversity of things we're talking about. The number of things that I didn't like were quite small, and largely came about as a result of the nature of the court. A court without any feeling for the history and tradition of Britain. A court with a lot of people from different countries who've got no reason to know about our history. So ideally, I would like to see us keep the main thrust, but bring the court judgments back to our own Supreme Court. Unfortunately, this produces for us a serious conundrum, and I've not yet heard any government minister have an answer to it. And it's this. As it stands, the European Convention, in the hands of Strasbourg, is effectively entrenched. No government could change it. No British government can change it. If we bring it back to Britain, to the United Kingdom, then it is no longer entrenched. And I ask myself, looking at the history of the last 20 years in this country, how governments would have responded when, let us say, 90 days detention without charge went across that set of tramp lines, or control orders, or DNA, or else. What the government would do, of course, is it would change the constitutional measure that they put in place to uphold that court. I will give way very briefly.
Extremely grateful. On this issue of entrenchment, my right honourable friend referred to Magna Carta. There are 3 clauses of Magna Carta that still remain the law today, 800 years later. You do not need entrenchment for the law to survive if it is good law.
20 years ago. Since then, I've lived through 3 sets of governments, none of whom I would trust with what I'm talking about here, the protection of liberty in this country. 3 clauses are left, out of how many? I've forgotten. A very large number have disappeared since then. And the harsh truth is that in the modern world, governments are very, very quick to modify things that are inconvenient to them. And when the Blair government was in power, it was very happy to do things which were just procedural issues, which the public did not pay any attention to, even though the effect of those procedural issues were enormous. And the only way to deal with this is to undertake effectively a written constitution for the United Kingdom. That couldn't be done on a partisan basis. It would have to be done on a bipartisan basis. It would take years. It would take more than a single parliament. So I'm afraid at the moment, as it stands, I am unwilling to support the human rights abolition unless I hear an answer to that conundrum, as well as the other ones put to the House earlier by my right honourable friend, the member for Beaconsfield. Just briefly in the last couple of minutes, I also have concerns about the Terrorism Bill, which moves us, or intends to move us, from stopping people making speeches which incite violence to ones which incite hatred. Now, I suspect many people in this House have made speeches which incite hatred, sometimes deliberately, sometimes not. How on earth we are going to make the judgment as to what actually crosses this line and what doesn't, without massively impeding our freedom of speech, I do not know. Remember, Voltaire's comments were, accurately, I despise what you say, but I will fight to the death your right to say it. Despise what you say. So we must remember that freedom of speech is the right to say things you do not like and are not comfortable with. And finally, the Communications Data Bill. Here I differ dramatically from the previous Attorney General. I have watched over many years the operation both of our agencies and foreign agencies. Most of them, all the time, pretty much all the time, behave honourably in terms of collecting data. But they take the view that collecting data is not wrong, it's just looking at it that's wrong. I'm afraid that's a semantic nonsense, because if you hold the data, you have the power of the Stasi even if you do not behave like the Stasi. You have the power of a totalitarian state, even if you do not behave like a totalitarian state. And we have all, those of us who have been here for many years, have seen governments from time to time misuse the data they have in front of them. So I would not be very willing to see us move further down that route, particularly when the Americans, as we speak, have moved the Freedom Bill, the Freedom Act it will be, by something like 330 votes to 88 votes in their Congress, which will reverse exactly the sort of mass collection of data which we are doing here. The Americans don't need it, but somehow we do. That seems to me to be an implausible argument. In my last 30 or 40 seconds, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will say this. I welcome the main parts of the Queen's speech, but there are some parts of it which are incredibly difficult in terms of liberty and justice in this country. We are in a small majority parliament. I don't want to see a return to the trials and tribulations of the 92-97 parliament. But what I do want to see is a government that doesn't just try and solve everything in Whitehall or solve it in a specially selected committee with specially selected members. I want to see these problems solved on the floor of this House, and I hope they give us the time to do it.